There we go. All right. Good evening, everybody. You have tuned in to the Shrens West Michigan Trout Unlimited, kind of our last scheduled seminar of the season. We've had a pretty good attendance record throughout the year. We've done a little bit of fishing and a good amount of ecology, and it's kind of cool to see. So my name is Dave DeYoung. I'm with the Shrens West Michigan Trout Unlimited chapter. We have Lance Climie also with us from the chapter. He was a former president and helped certainly set up all these things. He's going to do some introductions for our guest speakers in just a moment. And a couple of ground rules that we're just going to try to abide by. You've all been admitted, you're all muted. If you can stay that way, that'd be great. We certainly do want to hear your questions. You can put them into chat, whether that's on Zoom or YouTube. And we'll definitely be looking at those at some point, though. If we want to kind of open up the lines and let people kind of chat back and forth, we can do that as well. We're not going to be terribly strict on that, but we give our folks a chance to get their presentations out there. And three of our speakers today have some brief presentations about the projects that they're doing. And then we're going to have some time near the end where it's really, kind of an open panel discussion where we want to hear you. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Lance and let him go from there. And,
hello, how's everybody tonight? Thanks for joining us. This is the last of 5 Zoom sessions we put together over the winter and spring. So thanks for joining us. I think we've got some pretty good speakers on. Tonight I'm pretty excited because these 4 people do more work for fisheries in the Lower Peninsula, probably more than anybody. You got Kristin Thomas, who is the sole employee of Michigan Trout Unlimited, other than the director, is all over the place. Brian Gunderman and Mark Tonello and Jay Wesley, all from DNR Fisheries staff, different areas of expertise, but they're each going to introduce themselves. We have 3 little presentations, and their main focus tonight is they want to answer your questions. So please, in chat or either in YouTube or Zoom, let us know your questions, and they're looking forward to the panel discussion tonight. So with that, I'm going to introduce Kristin Thomas from Michigan Trout Unlimited.
Great, thanks, Lance. I'm going to try to keep my presentation concise because I think everyone's going to be more interested in some question and answer type stuff and less interested in listening to us talk at you. But just a little bit about me. As Lance said, I work for Michigan Trout Unlimited. I'm an aquatic ecologist for Michigan TU. I've been with Michigan TU for 12 years about. And I work all over the state, mostly right now doing a lot of project management and identification of work that we're doing. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about some of the conservation work we have happening at Michigan Trout Unlimited right now. So I'm just going to touch a little bit on sort of our conservation paradigm at Michigan TU. So kind of how we choose projects and how we try to choose projects. So there's sort of 2 kind of competing things there that I'll talk about. And then I'll just talk a little bit about a few projects we have going on, and then just give a quick little spiel about how if you guys ever would like assistance from Michigan TU, how you can go about getting assistance from me or Brian Burrows. So project selection. So there's sort of two different ways to do projects, right? So there's selecting things in a strategic way, and then there's opportunistic things. So strategic, right? You think like your strategic plan. All of our chapters have strategic plans. So things that you have on your list to do because they're really good work. And then opportunistic things also often are really good projects, but those are things that maybe come up sort of in different ways, right? They pop up here and there. Partners identify projects or money becomes available, stuff like that. So we definitely do both of those things. we've been trying over the last 10 years to move our arrow more towards strategic and a little bit less away from opportunistic, so that we have a little bit more science based in some of the work that we're doing. So so when we think of our strategic projects, it's where we're thinking about thoroughly evaluating a stream or watershed, figuring out what we think might be limiting that fishery, and then doing that work. And when we think about opportunistic stuff, that's stuff that pops up that we can't pass up, which happens quite a bit. We get a lot of things brought to us, and we certainly don't do all of those opportunistic projects, but quite a few of them. So we kind of are striving for a balance of those two, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about each project type and talk a little bit about some projects we have that fit within each of those. So our river stewards program is really what we use primarily for our strategic project selection. So there's a link here. You're welcome. Dave can share this presentation later. I can send it to him. But so if you want to check out the program, there's a link there. There's one more link in here too that might be of interest. But so when I started at TU, I created our River Stewards program, which is our data collection program. And we collect all different types of stream data. So temperature, habitat, fisheries data, macroinvertebrates. But it's really those types of data are what we use to try to identify projects in a strategic way. So the primary one for identifying fish habitat projects are the habitat map. We call it habitat mapping or habitat assessment protocol. And so what that is a really coarse way of looking at habitat in a whole stream or watershed. So it's a lot of visual estimation of what the stream bottom looks like. So if there's sand, gravel, cobble, boulder, how much run, riffle, and pool there is, and then in-stream habitat. So wood, aquatic vegetation, deep water, all those things. So we've gotten that data for about 18 cold water streams around the state of Michigan. That's what these graphs over here are. So all of these systems, so we can kind of compare those to each other to kind of figure out, where some streams might be lacking in some areas. So so let's see, I gotta move. I can't see what, there we go. So this top graph is substrate composition. So the fine is sand and silt, and that's the black on the bottom, and the gray is hard substrate. So gravel, cobble, boulder. And it's just showing the percent area of these streams that are fine or hard substrate. So you can see, what we're looking for in this habitat work is diversity. So these streams over on the right side have higher diversity, right? There's more hard, a little bit less fine. There's more diversity in those systems. So that would be sort of like an ideal situation in Michigan. These have, less diversity. But we also have to keep in mind what the stream is like naturally. So the upper Manistee, the little Manistee, those are sand bed streams, and they're always going to have a lot of fine substrate. So this in itself may not be an issue in those systems. We just kind of have to look at it, in a more holistic way. And so same thing with bed form. So the black is run habitat, and then the light gray is riffle, and the dark gray is pool. So these streams over here on the right have more diversity of habitat, less run and more riffle and pool, and especially riffle is good to see in our system. So this again is really driven by the natural shape of a watershed. So if it's a low gradient system with low slope without a lot of drop throughout, then there's going to be a lot more run, sort of regardless of what work you do. But it's helpful to know, if there's some areas where there's no riffle or no pool, and if there's ways that we can address that. So and we have the same thing for those in-stream habitat variables. So the idea is to try to get to a place of diversity if you're not already in a place of diversity. And this information can help us identify places within a river that might need some of that diversity work. So based on that, we can talk about how we pick strategic projects and what some of those are. So one, a big effort we have happening right now is the Upper Manistee Watershed Collaborative. And so that's a collaborative effort to try to assess the upper Manistee, the data that's there and what it looks like, to identify projects that will improve the fishery in sort of a meaningful and noticeable way. And we've been working with a group of about 20, a little more than 20 partners, to try to begin identifying and implementing projects in that watershed. So to do that, we tried to gather all or as much of the existing data for that system as we could. And I wrote a kind of a summary report of all of it, but I also made a map. So there's a link to this map here. I'm not going to do it on Zoom because it's a pain, like it almost never works, and you have to switch screens and it's kind of a pain. But this is just a screenshot of it. So if you get this presentation later, you can visit it, but it has dots, and there's a legend, and these are all different types of data we have for the upper Manistee River. If you click on a dot, a summary of that information will pop up. So we can see all the data and then look at it in a visual way. So that's been it's helpful for, identifying road stream crossings that might be acting as barriers to fish passage, and you can sort of see how they clump out throughout the watershed, and some other things. But so we got all that data together and got it out to the group. And then as a group, we spent like a whole day brainstorming what that data was pointing to as being priority projects, and sort of came to a consensus that there was an area in the upper system that has a lot, it's low gradient, so it's low slope, and there's a lot of areas in there that are really monotonous, just wide, sandy, and shallow, just without a lot of diversity. So we decided we wanted to try to increase diversity of habitat in those areas by adding woody structures. And we have sort of a suite of a few different types of wood habitat that we're adding in those places, with the idea being to increase the amount of wood, but also increase the diversity of velocity of the water, which will change the shape of the river, provide some little, some places where there's deeper water, maybe change the sediment substrate a little bit, but just increase that diversity. And so this is just a plan, one of the pages of our plan set for that project. Just shows some of the different structure types that we're planning to put in. And we'll be starting construction on that project this summer with the completing all the hinge cuts, which are on here. So that'll be cutting trees sort of halfway through and pulling them into the river and securing them. There's a lot of hinge cuts in this project, largely because it's a really hard to access area. So it's a good method for getting some structure in. And then next year, we'll start working on getting whole tree structures in, which again, it's a hard area to access. So that's going to be by helicopter. So we're still working through the logistics of figuring out how we're going to make that happen. But that'll be 2022 work. And then as we're implementing those projects, we're looking for our next set that we want to try to get funding for. So we're trying to get those lined up and start trying to find funding so that we'll be ready to work on those as soon as we finish these phase 1 projects. I will say so far on this project, we had really good support from the collaborative group and really good data to back up this work that we're doing. And it was relatively easy so far. Now it will never be easy again, but relatively easy so far to get funding to implement this project. Easier than often it is. But I think, and I like to think that that's because we did a lot of work to really show why the project was necessary and supported. So that's like our ideal way of working, right? Another strategic project we have going on is a temperature study in the Iron River, which is in the UP, the far western UP. It's very far away from me in Lansing. And we're doing a pretty thorough assessment of temperature, like 22 loggers throughout that watershed for 3 years to get a really good idea about the temperature regime. And then they're going to use that information to focus some efforts, find some areas that they want to focus on for improvement work. So that's another sort of strategic project we have happening. So opportunistic. So these are projects that are often really, really good, but just pop up in different ways, right? So maybe a partner brings it to you, an owner, funding's available. So the pictures here are a dam. It's called Murray Dam. It's on Hunt Creek, which is a tributary to the west branch of Big Creek in the AuSable, and that is the Luzerne West Branch Big Creek, because there's two. And so this is a dam. It's a one family owns the property that includes the entire impoundment and dam. And they their impoundment is sedimented in. So it's not really functioning as a pond anymore. They brought it to us and said, I think, we think probably removal is going to be the best option here. Can you help us? And so we put in temperature loggers to see kind of what we were dealing with, and found out that this stream is having this dam is having an incredible temperature impact on the stream. So the dam in Hunt Creek is having an average of like a 10-degree warming impact on the stream in the summer, which is a lot. And then the dam is only about 900 feet upstream from West Branch of Big Creek. So there's also about a 3 to 5 degree warming impact happening in West Branch Big Creek also from the dam. So it started out as sort of an opportunity that quickly became a strategic project, because it is having such an incredible temperature impact. So we are again planning for construction on this removal this summer, working through permitting and all that stuff, but we do have funding and everything in place for that one. So that's that top one. And then another sort of opportunistic but really great project that we're hoping to work on. We haven't heard back about funding on this one yet, but is working on some fish passage at the Grayling Fish Hatchery. So that one a partner brought to us and asked if we would be willing to manage that project. And so so the idea is to try to get fish passage there, and it would open up passage to pretty much the entire east branch of the AuSable, which would be really great for the system, of course. So we are hoping to get funding to do an engineering and feasibility study on that this summer, which will involve a lot of facilitation of partners and figuring out what the best solution for that property is. But it's an opportunistic one that's also going to be really good for the watershed, I think. So those are kind of the examples of how we choose projects. And again, we try to be strategic as much as possible. And then even with our opportunistic work, we try to strategically choose the best opportunities that are presented to us, I guess. And then, so if we are for requests for work for us, for help from me or Brian, so our job is to support our chapters around the state. So really, if you need our assistance or want it in some way, you really just have to ask. And if we can, if it's at all possible, we'll help you out. So, we are also happy to leave chapters alone if they don't need help, and you guys do a lot of really great work and often don't ask a lot from us, and that's also okay. But we're always happy to help if we can. Oh, shoot, what happened? Sorry about that. Well, it's okay. We were almost done. So, but we're happy to help with granting, project management, whatever, permits, anything that you might need to help advance a project along. We're happy to do that work. So that's all I have for my presentation.
Thanks, Kristin. That's fantastic. Great information. We certainly appreciate you passing along your contact information as well for anybody who has a project or an idea, and it'll pass it along. There's some great stuff there on the Upper Manistee and over in Hunt Creek. It's interesting, as well as the Grayling Fish Hatchery. Okay, so we've got a couple other presentations. I'm not sure exactly who's going next. We didn't really decide at the beginning. We got Jay Wesley or Brian Gunderman, I think, up next. Question mark.
Yes, I can go ahead and go. So let's see if I can share my screen here. And are you able to see that?
Yes.
All right, cool. So I'm going to stop my video just so I can have a little more power here. My name is Jay Wesley. I'm the Lake Michigan Basin Coordinator, and I've been with the Michigan DNR for almost 25 years now. Started as a biologist, worked up through a manager position, and been a Lake Michigan Basin Coordinator since 2015. So I wanted to talk a little bit about steelhead limits, and it's not that we're going out to suggest steelhead limits. It's really just starting a conversation based on the last couple of years of returns. So there's some interest from anglers to talk about it. And there we go. So a little history about steelhead limits in at least Lake Michigan. They were a 5 daily total for the big lake or the river. And in 1989, it changed to 3 fish per day. And that was also for Chinook salmon because of the post-BKD era. We do have some rivers like the Pere Marquette River that has a section that's down to 1 fish per day and some catch and release sections. But for the rest of our rivers, it's 3 fish per day. And to give you some more history, there's been some interest to reduce bag limits, for the last 10 years. We went out to the entire state looking for feedback on a statewide reduction, and that failed. We looked at some key Lake Michigan tributaries like the Manistee, the Muskegon, the entire PM, and we didn't get much public support there. And then just recently, we went to the Cold Water Resources Committee and asked about whether people would want a lower bag limit for wild steelhead, because we're starting to mark all the steelhead that are stocked in Lake Michigan and Huron. And that never got through committee. So we kind of dropped it for a while, but there's been a lot of interest from guides and a few anglers this year, just because the last couple of runs have been relatively low. And I think their angle is, with the runs being lower, if the bag limit was lower, you could recycle more fish. So in theory, your catch rates would at least be maintained or go up in a river system because you're catching and releasing fish multiple times. So how does Michigan compare to the other states? Ohio is currently at 5, but they go down to 2, and that's in Lake Erie. Pennsylvania switches back and forth from 3 to 5. New York starts out at 3 in Big Lake, in at least Lake Erie, and then in Lake Ontario, it's 2 and 1. Minnesota has a unique steelhead limit, and it's 5 for clipped fish, for hatchery fish, but you have to catch and release all unclipped fish, which would be wild fish. And then our surrounding states of Lake Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin all have a bag limit of 5. We're looking at it kind of as a biological view. We're seeing really big, healthy fish. So we think the balance in the lake is pretty good. We don't think there's a disease problem going on at all. Our stocking's been really consistent, so we can't blame the lower returns on stocking. We think stock systems have been doing okay. We at least see saturation of smolts in those wild streams. And harvest seems to be low, at least from the data we have, or at least average, but we don't have much creel data for our rivers. So some things we can look at and to gauge size is we have a master angler program. So any steelhead over 32 inches qualifies for master angler. So we can use this for trends throughout the trout time. So in the mid 90s, we saw a lot of master angler steelhead, suggesting things were, at least they're getting a lot to eat at that point. Through the mid 2000s, it really slowed down. And then more recently, we're seeing some bigger fish. So maybe the correlation is when we have bigger fish, we just have fewer fish. And that certainly makes sense in most biological situations. So people may be remembering back when we had a lot of small fish in the system. This is our stocking annually, and this is our yearlings. So it's been very consistent, I would say, throughout time, with a little bit of an increase more recently. So I don't think that the decline is due to stocking. We have some systems like the St. Joe River, which are heavily stocked systems that we can at least monitor returns through fish ladders. And Indiana continues to monitor their fish passage. Michigan did for many years, but has since it has not been at least enumerating the recordings through there. But anyway, the returns through the fish ladder have been pretty good, even when folks thought it was low. So the fish are there. And then this is just this March. March returns through the South Bend Fish Ladder, and they saw some of the highest returns in March since they've been recording there. So it doesn't quite match what the anglers were saying, or at least what they were catching. So then we go to our wild systems and we try to look at, are they still producing smolts like they have been? And we don't necessarily have surveys that specifically measure or survey for smolts, but we have index stations where we do catch rainbow trout. And this is looking at the age 0 and 1 rainbows in those systems. And they've been, we're not as high as we were in the 90s, but it's been fairly consistent, maybe a little downturn more recently. But typically we have enough smolts to saturate the habitat in these systems. And I see no reason why we don't have enough smolts right now. Something that has been very unique is precipitation. And you may recall, Lake Michigan was at a historic low in 2012, and then we're all of a sudden at historic highs in 2020. And much of that was because our rolling average of precipitation was the highest in history the last 5 years. So maybe these systems, especially the wild systems, were just getting blown out at the wrong times and maybe causing some issue with survival of smolts. It's hard to say, but it's possible. And the higher lake levels may be affecting smolts when they outmigrate to the lake. Maybe it's slowing them down in the lower river mouths and making them more susceptible to predation. Looking at lake harvest, and this is all our main species like Chinook and lake trout, steelhead, brown trout, coho. We're at a pretty low time in Lake Michigan, and it's mostly because the productivity of the lake is down. The phosphorus levels are down. Quagga mussels and zebra mussels have also sequestered a lot of nutrients to the bottom. And the lake just can't support the same fisheries that it did in the 80s. So maybe this is just the new normal, that we're in a good balance now, and we just can't expect to see high catches of fish like we had in history. So this is the same data, just pulling out lake harvest. I often hear from river anglers that they think the big lake anglers are catching all the fish, and that's why they're not seeing them in the rivers. And, the big lake anglers really haven't been limiting out much at all or harvesting like they used to in terms of steelhead. I don't think harvest in the big lakes the issue. So from a biological standpoint, we don't think there's a big issue, or we just haven't figured it out yet. I'm looking at these regulations more out from a social perspective. So I was getting a lot of gripe from guides. Guides are fishing the lower Muskegon, upper Muskegon, the Manistee, the PM, fewer on the Betsy, but, they're all coming to me saying we got to do something with these bag limits. And they're saying that, people in the lower river are catching and harvesting way too many fish, and that's why we're not getting them in the upper river. And the fact is, we just don't have the data. We don't have creel data. We're probably 10 years behind in most river creel data. We are planning one in Muskegon in 2023, but it's going to be a while before we get that. The guides, I think the numbers of them have really increased in the last 10 years, but we have no data from guides at all. We get really good data from our charter boat captains on the big lakes, but we have no data coming in from our guides. So we are really interested in getting a new guide bill introduced and passed that would require mandatory reporting with guides, so we could at least know how many there are, where they're fishing, and some idea what their catch is. And some other ways we can get voluntary data, and even a few folks are steelhead anglers. There's a Great Lakes Angler Diary program through Michigan Sea Grant. So that's a way, it's an app you can put on your phone, and you can record your catch for the day, as well as how many of those steelhead were clipped or unclipped. So that's one way we can get information is from folks like yourself. We also, I had mentioned that all the steelhead are adipose fin clipped and most have a coated wire tag. So if you are going to keep steelhead, make sure you turn in the head if the adipose fin is missing. And that would give us great information on where that fish was stocked, when, where it's been moving around, how old it is, and what strain it is, whether it's a Michigan strain, whether it's a Skamania or even a Ganaraska from the Wisconsin side. And so we, at this point, if this is a social issue, we got to do social surveys, and we haven't done one yet, but we're planning on doing some sort of a random survey of our anglers just to see, what they would like to see in a steelhead limit and see if their values have changed now compared to 10 years ago when we were unsuccessful at changing limits. So the other thing I wanted to talk about, which I think you had interest in, is the Grand Rapids River for All. And I don't have a lot on this. I just want to introduce it to you, and we can talk more in the panel. But the Grand Rapids River for All is basically a project that's been in the works for probably 10 years now. And the idea was to remove the 6th Street Dam as well as the 4 coffer dams and diversify the habitat there to make it more unique, I guess, for fishing and to bring in other recreational opportunities like kayaking, and to kind of turn the city to the river. So give the city something to look at. So provide more green space, try to remove those flood walls and create parks in its place. So there's a lot of aspects of it, which would be really cool. And I hope some part of it actually gets through someday. Some more details on that. So, it's all about increasing connectivity. So by removing those flood walls, people can get to the river a lot easier rather than specific access points. More green space, getting people to face the river versus turn their backs to it. More parks. And the key is to have more walk-in wading access and more boat access. At least that's what they're talking about. They also want to improve the complexity of the habitat. So they're talking about bringing in more rock type structure and diversifying flows and things. In theory, it should be better for fish passage. We have been going back and forth with their designs, and we're not so sure that we're comfortable with that yet, but at least it will be similar passages to now. And I think their ultimate goal is to provide better recreation opportunity, and that's with kayakers. The big kicker here is that the current 6th Street Dam is a functional sea lamprey barrier, and that whatever happens, if they remove the 6th Street Dam, a new barrier would have to be constructed. Right now, they're looking at an area around Ann Street and looking at some sort of inflatable type barrier that you can lift when you need to block lamprey, but lower during other times of year to allow fish passage. So where they're at now, they're doing 2 phases. The first phase is the lower reach, the 4 coffer dams. So they do have a design for that to put in rock structures in place of those 4 coffer dams. And they've been trying to get what used to be a DEQ permit, but an Eagle permit. And so far have not had an application that's administratively complete. So they're going back and forth with the administrators there. So they're kind of back to the drawing board a little bit right now. The upper reach would actually remove 6th Street Dam, put in a rock structure there, and then also include the sea lamprey barrier. And that's going through an environmental impact statement now. And so there's a lot to review there. They're looking at the entire project impacts. Impacts of sea lamprey fish passage. There's a federal endangered species called the snuffbox mussel there. Different trade-offs rather than trying to maximize waves in the river for kayakers. How can you limit that and still have good fish passage? there's some environmental justice issues going on. So there are a lot of things that are being looked at as a whole package. So that's about all I can really update on that it's moving, but moving slow. And that's all that I have. So.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Jay. Say, so I've got a question of my own, and we have a question from the audience, and I'll just go with mine first because it was timely. You mentioned the Grand Rapids River for all and the lower 4 coffer dams that were coming out, and it was sort of hung up. It's not quite going through and all that. And anybody who's down there, there's dams that go all the way across the river. It's a straight shot. And the thought is to replace those with some rock. And I recognize maybe not the whole thing is done yet, but any idea of what that's looking like from, I guess, sketches that have gone out to the public? It seems to be sort of kind of rocks here and there, and you mentioned the kayaker type of thing and all that. And maybe you don't know because they haven't presented it, but I'd be curious if you knew anything else about it.
Yeah. So the design that I've seen is they maintain the same water surface elevation at those coffer dams, but replace the dams with rock structures that would still go all the way across the river. If you're looking upstream, most of the main flow will be down the left side. That's where the wave structures, if you will be. So on the museum side, and then be like a third of the river, and then 2/3 of the river would be more gently sloped, more of your traditional flow that you would see in a big river system, probably wading and fishing and boating. Be the 2/3 of the side on the like the Amway Grand Hotel side.
Yeah. Okay. So nowadays, and guides with jet boats kind of zip up across that stuff. Is that doable with all those rocks there, or
yeah, not? They're envisioning even drift boats going down through there. So I think the jet boats would still be able to get up during most flow. I mean, there can be low sun where they probably can't get up, but during your average spring flows, or hopefully in the fall, they can get up.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. Okay, so there was another one, and it's back to the steelhead issue, and you hit on it a little bit earlier, and one of our viewers right now, who's on, asks about the steelhead returns kind of in the Ludington. He says fall surf and pier fishermen report catches that are unusually small, with unusually small skippers as far as steelhead go in the last few years. He says, is that due to lack of forage for smolts in that first year? If so, does that impact survival and returns? And you've kind of hit on a number of those things, and maybe there's not a definitive answer. I don't know.
Yeah, those skippers that they're seeing, at least the ones I've seen, and I've seen them up and down the coast, they're actually just young fish. And so that's actually a good sign that those year classes had pretty good survival and they're around, because I don't think we saw a lot of skippers 3-4 years ago. It was mostly these bigger fish that were 10+ pounds. So I think that's a good sign. That to me, it says we did have an issue possibly with survival for a couple of years, and that's the impact we're seeing on our returns now. But the future looks pretty that you're catching skippers out there. So I don't know if Mark has anything to add with that, given that he probably knows Ludington and PM a little bit better.
Well, the only I would say is that at the weir this spring, the amount of skippers we saw, younger males we saw, was proportional. I wouldn't say it was overwhelming, but they were there. So again, that tells you that we're getting at least some survival. And we did see both clipped and unclipped, skippers at the weir. So, some wild fish and some hatchery fish. So Yeah, so I would take the presence of smaller steelhead or skippers as a good thing, just like Jay said.
I have a question. Hello, am I on?
Yep.
My name's Mike Everts. I live in Petoskey. And I'm wondering, with the egg take not happening last year because of the pandemic, if anybody's going to take opportunity of having this break in the stocking to study the wild production of the steelhead in other rivers other than some of the ones that are not stocked. I've been studying it myself with just noticing how many little fish I've been catching as I go down every night and drift a bead through these different runs in the Bear River, which is our biggest tributary of Little Traverse Bay. And I think it's kind of a nice opportunity to see how many wild fish are there. In terms, this is the time of year where I get the feeling they're down running. So anyway, is there any opportunistic identifying of that as something to take a look at?
That's a really good point, Mike. And, we don't have a specific study to look at that, but, in our own workings and with our creel surveys and hopefully with that Great Lakes Angler Diary program, we'll get an understanding of what's going on. The key is, though, we need, like if you're catching older adult fish, kind of need an age to link it to the year test where we didn't stock. So that would be key. But the main thing, we can do that now with this mass marking program, that we're at least getting a fin clip to all hatchery fish. So
Yeah.
for the next 5 years, 6 years, that'll be a great study. So anybody who's catching a fish can determine whether that's a hatchery or wild fish. So
Yeah, and of course, in 3 years will be the other time to kind of take a look at, the run,
Yep.
see how many unfin clip fish there are. And anyway, that's just something, I don't know how you would design that, or the diary seems to be the best, if anything, just get information from people. Anyway, that's just something I've been thinking about.
yeah, and on the St. Joe, where we can count fish that go through, that will be an interesting study because that's primarily a stock system. So what's going to happen in 3 years in that return? Will that really go down? So I guess we'll be able to tell.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Okay, thanks. Oh, go ahead.
It seems to me that the brown trout are drastically down. And from what I've been reading, Wisconsin has done a tremendous job and brought their brown trout with their stocking way back up. Have you looked at their stocking program?
Yeah. So you're referring to Lake Michigan. Both Michigan and Wisconsin kind of drastically reduced their brown trout stocking in recent history. Michigan, we were at about 400 or 500. We're down to about 300,000 right now. Our returns were just terrible. When we looked at the return to creel, it cost us almost $400, $500 per fish coming back to the creel. Wisconsin has a little bit different setup. For one thing, they're on the other side of the lake, which is a very different habitat quality compared to our side. We're a sandy side, often have warm water blowing this way in the summertime. They're more rocky over there and often have upwellings of colder water in the summertime. So I think their habitat just sets up really nice for brown trout. So that's one thing. They also have the original C4Ellen strain, which seems to be doing really well. We had C4Ellens here. They just did not do well for us. So we switched, we've been doing Wild Rose strain. We've been doing Gilchrist Creek strain. We've been doing Sturgeon River strain, doing all that we can to try to change what's the survival of brown trout on the Michigan side, and really haven't had much success. So our last effort now is we've reduced or eliminated the southern ports and concentrated our stocking pretty much from Ludington up to Petoskey to see if an increase in stocking level would help survival. And we're seeing some mixed results of that. I think the big piece, Michigan had a really good brown trout program when we had a ton of alewife. Those alewife not only give those brown trout cover from predation of other predators, but provided them a good food source, especially the young 1-year-old alewife. So without alewife, there's not as much to eat over here. We're on the Wisconsin side, being more rocky. They've got probably more goby density. So these brown trout are really doing well on gobies, which is another invasive species. So
Okay. I have a couple quick follow-up questions. We don't seem to be stocking. I do a lot of fishing up in the Boyne City area, not only Jordan, and the Boyne and over by Vanderbilt, but I don't see any stocking in Lake Charlevoix or Walloon Lake, and they used to have real good results there. I mean, real good brown trout taking there. And the other question that I have is, if alewives are an issue, why aren't we raising alewives and smelt to release?
yeah, I'll take the last question. Then maybe we can go to Brian and get through his real quick and then open up the panel.
Yeah,
But
we are going to kind of move forward on this, Jay. So
I'll come back to your alewife question when we come back to the. So,
Okay. I didn't mean to dominate the session.
no worries.
now, Mark, for what it's worth, I'll jump in and I'll be that voice of not the DNR, but the Trout Unlimited side. Trout Unlimited is really behind not stocking necessarily. We recognize that it does happen, but it's not really the thing that the chapters are into. We want to protect, conserve, restore those rivers, not into harvesting. That's what it is. We want to protect the rivers. We're not all about putting in fish into creels. And I'm not saying that's necessarily you, but from what I'm hearing, that's kind of what the question is.
Yeah, and it is, but we're up against the walleye guys. And
I'm just telling you, Mark, it's an ecology question. Okay. Yep, I get where you're coming from. And I think you're in a direction that we're not necessarily in that same vein.
Okay. All right. I'm good with that.
Okay.
I just wanted to ask the question and see where it fell.
Yep.
We can get back to it a little bit when we hit the panel discussion too. I can talk about Walloon Lake and Lake Charlevoix a little bit if folks want.
Thanks, Mark.
Yep. Thank you.
With that, I think maybe we've got
Brian?
one more presentation
Okay, I'll start sharing my screen here.
with Brian. Yeah, thanks.
All right. Everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Indeed.
All right. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Brian Gunderman. I'm the Southern Lake Michigan Unit Manager for the DNR. I started my career at the DNR almost 17 years ago now as the biologist out of Baraga in the West UP. I transferred down to Plainwell in 2008 to be the St. Joseph River biologist. I did that for several years. And then in 2016, I moved to my current position as the Southern Lake Michigan Unit Manager, which means I basically cover the Grand, Kalamazoo, and St. Joe watersheds. So today I just want to kind of fill you in on some habitat projects that are happening on trout streams in our neck of the woods. When I I wrote this as stream habitat projects. What it's going to end up being is all dam removals, whether that's human dams or beaver dams, because that's basically what's been happening lately. So the big project that's going on for us right now is the Pucker Street Dam removal on the Dowagiac River. For those of you who don't know where that is, it's down in Niles in the southwest corner of the state. The Dowagiac flows into the St. Joseph River. And we have on the St. Joseph River, Jay alluded to it earlier, we have fish ladders at 5 different dams down there. But those fish ladders allow steelhead and salmon to get up past the dams. And then, so they are able to get up past those dams and into the lower Dowagiac River. But once they get about 3 miles upstream on the Dowagiac, they hit this dam, the Pucker Street Dam. And that is the end of the line for them, or at least has been the end of the line for them. So as I just mentioned, that dam confines salmon and steelhead to the lower 3 miles of the Dowagiac River. And that lower 3 miles has gotten a lot of fishing pressure over the years. It's a very popular salmon and steelhead spot. Also has stocked brown trout in it as well. But now with this dam removal project, it's going to open up about 159 river miles. So a huge project. Roughly 28 of those river miles are on the Dowagiac River itself. And then the rest is tributary streams. So I'll give you a little timeline on how long we've been working on this project. They stopped. So the Pucker Street Dam was a hydroelectric dam. Although it's outside of the city of Niles, the city of Niles owned it and they benefited from the power that was generated from it. So they generated power for many years in there. But then in 1995, it just became, the dam was in too poor a shape. The impoundment was filling up too rapidly. And they just decided to stop generating power. A few years later in 1999, they wanted to take some pressure off the dam. So they did a 5-foot drawdown. During that drawdown, there was more sediment released than they expected. So the DNR wound up doing installing a sand trap. Fortunately, although it looked pretty bad, the river was able to flush a lot of that sediment out fairly quickly based on our monitoring. But that kind of factored into the way we planned the current dam removal. So in 2013, so we had this drawdown, 5-foot drawdown in 1999. After that, there was a lot of hemming and hawing about what do we do with this dam long term? Are we going to fix it up and try to generate power again? Are we going to tear it down? What are we going to do? And finally, in 2013, the city, after evaluating the options, thoroughly decided to pursue dam removal. So from 2013 through early 2020, there was a lot of engineering work, a lot of trying to gather funding for it, and then getting through all the different permits that needed to happen to be able to do the dam removal. So as of last fall, or actually fall of 2019, the city was still waiting on a permit from Eagle to remove the part of the dam that was in the water. But they wanted to get started on some stuff that was above the water. So the powerhouse dam, or the powerhouse of the dam that was sitting over here, was removed in fall of 2019. That was kind of some of the initial work on there. In June of 2020, after they finally got their Eagle permit, the actual dam removal started. So in here, they're installing a coffer dam on the upstream side to kind of isolate the area to be able to work. So some differences between this project and the drawdown that happened in 1999. One thing is that before this drawdown and dam removal even started, they excavated a sediment trap immediately upstream of the dam. So they wanted to be proactive and get that done immediately. Another thing is that throughout the entire impoundment, they've been actively removing sediment, excavating a pilot channel. So the intent isn't to build a channel that's like permanent. We know the river is going to move, but we're trying to get a channel that's semi-stable, or at least speeds up the healing process so less sediment goes downstream. So they're taking a lot of sediment out, shaping a river that can then kind of reform a little more naturally and more quickly. So that's what they're doing right here in this photo, is they're excavating sediment from the impoundment. This is probably about halfway up the former reservoir. And you can see these banks here that have been tapered, and then the stuff that before it was tapered. And this is immediately upstream of the Pucker Street Dam. And there's these banks were over 10 feet tall by the end of the drawdown. And you can see these have been laid back, and they've since been had seed and everything put down there. So one of the other differences here too is, since we had, I think it was around 16, 18 feet, something like that, the dam went down. We didn't do that all in one go. There was one fairly major drawdown in the early part after the sediment trap was excavated. And then since then, it's been a bunch of like 2-foot drawdowns to slowly get the dam or the water level down to where it needs to be. So, and as part of this too, I don't have good pictures of it, but we've been doing a lot of sediment monitoring downstream. You know, myself and Matt Diana from our office, and then Grant Poole from the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi have been doing a couple of transects downstream of the dam. And we're basically doing measuring the stream bed elevation and making sure we don't have a big change in that would indicate we're getting a lot of sediment deposited downstream of the dam. The city's also been doing some turbidity monitoring both upstream and downstream of the project area too. And if they hit certain thresholds, they have to stop work and figure out new strategies. So there's been a lot of eyes on this one. So this shot was taken about where that previous one was, and you can see this was last fall. So there was already a fair bit of vegetation starting to come in on the banks. They initially planted rye just to get some quick cover down, but they're going back in to try to get some more native wetland type of vegetation going on these banks. And this is where the dam was. So this is what it looked like a couple of weeks ago. You can see the dam is gone, other than some rock that they've got in place here to kind of hold back water for a sediment trap. So the sediment trap is right in this area. In the next month or so, this is going to be taken out, and there's going to be a riffle that's going to go from about here all the way down past your screen here. That's going to be a nice gradual spot for fish and boats to get through. So one of the big things we've been dealing with on this dam removal, besides all the ecology aspects, is just angler access. So the dam was at Lazinski Park, and we had hoped to keep that park open throughout the entire project, but there was a change part of the way through where the city acquired some land just to the west of the park, and that was going to allow them to dispose of the dredge spoils on uplands and save a lot of their wetland mitigation costs that they were going to have to pay. So that was the big ecological and economic benefit. The trade-off was that meant the dump trucks were then going to be running right through the park, and it created human safety concerns. So we kept it open through the fall salmon run, but then the park's been closed since December. We plan on getting it reopened again before fall with some sort of temporary boat ramp. If any of you ever launched a boat at that park, it's by no means a great boat ramp. It's a pretty lousy one. The temporary ramp will be probably better than that one. And then eventually we'd like to have a much better boat ramp and improved parking there. And there's probably going to be some additional grants involved in trying to fund that work. Now that fish can get past the dam, we needed to really start looking at what kind of access is upstream. So we currently have I'm going to try to minimize this here. We currently have access at a DNR boat ramp at Peavine Street, so the river's flowing this way. And then so this one is suitable for drift boats or canoes or kayaks. And then Dodd Park here has a canoe launch. So you have to carry your canoe and put it in there. Those are places people can get in the water upstream and chase the steelhead and salmon and brown trout that are stocked up there. The downside is that there's a ton of trees in the river through there. good fish habitat, but really difficult for navigation. So the Southwest Michigan Planning Commission, Cass County Parks, they're looks like they've got a foundation that's probably going to be providing funding for them to hire somebody to go in this summer and start just doing selective clearing of logs. They're going to leave a lot of fish habitat there, but they just want to clear it enough that you can get through the river. So ultimately, we'd like people to be able to launch at Peavine and get all the way down through the project area and down to M139, which is, there's another boat launch down here. So the distribution of fishing effort in that river is going to change. We've already had steelhead this spring up in here. So they can also get up this major tributary known as Dowagiac Creek. And there's a dam in Dowagiac, and I'm guessing that's going to be one of the new spots where people are going to start to fish. City of Dowagiac is looking at improving their public access there as well. So I spent a lot of time on the Pucker Street Dam removal. The rest of these are going to be much quicker because they're smaller projects and we haven't had as much involvement with them. So the next one I want to talk about is the Portage Creek Milham Park Dam removal. So this is within the city of Kalamazoo. It's part of their park system. And Portage Creek is a stocked brown trout stream. It flows right through the cities of Portage and Kalamazoo. In 2019, DNR awarded a dam management grant to the city to remove the dam. They've got their engineering and design done. I think their Eagle permit is in the public comment phase, I think right now. And I believe they just hired a contractor. So now they're hopefully, depending on how things go with permitting and everything, hopefully late summer, they'll be starting removal. And this is you can see this is a much smaller dam than we were dealing with at Pucker Street. It's a low head dam, but behind here, so that is, just a wide, shallow area that really is not good trout habitat. And there's a big bend in the river here that flows through the park. So they've got a lot of stream frontage. Right now, there's not a lot of trout in this section of the river, even though we stock upstream. Hopefully that will improve as this dam is gone and we get some better kind of higher gradient habitat through here. The only downside is that just a little ways downstream of this dam, there's another dam called the Monarch Mill Pond. So downstream, we're not going to see a lot of downstream benefits, but we will see some upstream benefits here. Some other projects that are kind of in the engineering and kind of dam removal feasibility phase. The city of Portage on the same creek here, Portage Creek. So just a little bit upstream of the Milham Park Dam we just talked about. There's another really old mill dam called the Elijah Root Dam. And the city of Portage has hired an engineering firm to look at designing a dam removal and the feasibility of that. Another project is on Rio Grande Creek, which is a tributary to Crockery Creek. So up in, I think this is in Muskegon County. There's a Patterson Park as a small dam. And you can't even, there's so much snow. And I took this picture, you can't even really see the dam, but it's right here. It's about a foot or two high. That dam has failed, it's breached. And so now they're looking for money to try to remove that. They applied for grants. We'll know soon whether they got it or not, but the hope is to remove that dam fairly soon. And the DNR actually stocks brown trout up, not very far upstream of this dam. And then the final, kind of dam removal project I want to talk about is the 118th Street Dam on Swan Creek. So this is in Allegan County, another stocked brown trout stream. This dam is actually built right into the bridge. So it's going to be a little more complicated. The dam is owned by Wildlife Division of the DNR. And then of course the bridge is the Road Commission's deal. But so Wildlife Division is starting to apply for funding to get the initial engineering work done, because ultimately they'd like to remove this dam. It doesn't really provide good wildlife habitat behind there. And they'd rather, the DNR would rather open this up for better trout fishing. So I'm going to conclude with some other types of dam removals instead of dealing with human-made dams, just kind of clean up some rivers where we've had some problems with beavers. We recently, I guess over the winter, removed some beaver dams on Mill Creek. This is in Berrien County. That one has, I think, a little bit of natural reproduction, not much, but we also stock brown trout downstream of where we remove these dams. So these dams are on private property, and the landowner let us in to kind of clean that up and help water temperatures be better downstream. On the Dowagiac Creek in Cass County. So this is that same creek that flows into the Dowagiac River. This would be farther upstream past the city of Dowagiac, past where salmon and steelhead will be able to get. This is in a area that's good brown trout water. The backcountry hunters and anglers recently removed a dam just upstream of Rust Forest County Park, and Matt Diana from our office went down and helped them out with that. So it was a backcountry anglers project, but we had a little bit of involvement through our biologist. And then finally, Bear Creek, which is part of the Grand River system in Kent County. We've got one of our status and trends long-term monitoring sites on that river, and beavers built a dam right within our sampling section. So we've been working on removing that dam. So that is what we got going on right now. Like I said, it's very heavy to dam removals. We don't have any wood addition project that we're specifically working on right now. I know I've had conversations with Aaron Snell about Prairie Creek and the work that's going on there. But as far as direct DNR involvement, that's pretty much it for our area right now. So I'm gonna close this out and stop sharing my screen here.
Okay. Hey, thank you, Brian. That's some pretty good information. A lot of dam removals going on, reconnecting the streams. It looked like there was some work potentially happening this summer. Is that right? Beyond the the beaver dams that happened over the winter.
Right. So the Dowagiac we're wrapping up that project. So that one is the Pucker Street Dam removal should be finished sometime this summer with just monitoring basically and making sure vegetation gets established and a little bit of sediment monitoring downstream. But that one is in its final phases. The other one that would happen this year, hopefully, is the Milham Park Dam removal in Kalamazoo.
Okay. Cool. Any other questions that maybe came up for Brian regarding that? Doesn't sound like it. I don't see anything out there.
I have a quick question.
Actually, there. Okay. Yep. There's two questions came up. Go ahead.
This is Mike again from Petoskey. I've been watching the Pucker Street Dam removal by fishing it, a few years ago, and we went down there in December and saw a ton of sediment going downstream. It might have been after a high water event that kind of etched into that upstream area. So how long do you estimate that river with its fairly high gradient will take to flush that through and re-expose some of that downstream habitat?
I don't think very long, because so in late March, we had a bank full flow event in there and it flushed a lot of that stuff down. It's been kind of ebbing and flowing. So we'll have, one of those 2-foot drawdowns, and there'll be a little pulse of sediment that will go down, and then the flow will come up a little bit and it'll push it out. So it seems like it's moving it out really fast. And within the impoundment, we're already seeing a lot of gravel exposed, especially after that bank full event. We were surprised. We went out there in April and we were seeing a lot of gravel just upstream of the dam. So I think the river is able to move a lot of sediment. When it gets high, it really rips. So I don't think it'll be very long at all, based on what we saw in 1999 and what we've seen so far. There's been, we've got people that fish it a lot and kind of report down below past our transects. I guess first of all, back up and talk about what we've seen at our transects or monitoring. Our threshold was if it hit 20% of the bank full channel, we had to stop. I think the highest we've got up in term is like 10 or 11. And then right at the last one, it was at like 2 or 3% of the channel, cross-sectional area changed with sediment. So it's been passing past those really quickly. But we've got people that have been just keeping eyes on it downstream, and they've kind of seen the same thing. They'll be like, "Oh, this spot looks really bad," and then they go out the next time like, "Oh, it looks pretty good again." And so it's changing really fast.
Okay, thanks.
Brian, another question on the Pucker Street Dam, and that came from Brett Hartford, and it's really
Brian, I have a
about
question.
the. Okay. Lance, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was asking Brian about the condition of the Kalamazoo River below Morrow Dam. And what's the prognosis for that stream down there below? There's a lot of craft that flowed out of that dam into that river.
Yeah, that's going to be a lot longer term project. We've got, I guess about all I can say is they've been doing so that the consultants for the people that own the dam were charged with going in and assessing sediment quantity and the distribution of that sediment. They came back with a report that we've been discussing with Eagle and at next action steps. They've done some minor removals. So we are kind of in discussions with Eagle, and especially Eagle and the Attorney General's office are in discussions with them now. So a lot of this is now happening way above my head, but so hopefully soon, you know, we'll have some sort of agreement that says this is what's going to get cleaned up. This is whether there's any kind of mitigation money or anything like that. That's still all up in the air, and a lot of it confidential that I'm not even privy to right now. But there is still a lot of movement and been a lot of meetings until recently. Now that they're kind of the lawyers are talking, it's getting, you know, us biologists are not in the room as much. But so I guess, yeah, our hope would be, yes, they would do a lot of active excavation in there, possibly, you know, hitting the trouble spots, and then also maybe installing some sediment traps downstream to be able to, you know, do some damage control. That's just things we've talked about, but we'll have to see what ultimately gets worked out with the lawyers and all that stuff.
Brian, there was another question about the Pucker Street in Dowagiac. When that dam came out, how many river miles did it open up for, you know, steelhead and salmon to kind of run upstream?
Yeah, so it's between the main stem and the tributaries. It's 159. So it is the about 28 of that is the main river itself. So they'll be able to go all the way up to the headwaters of the river. And then you've got some major tributaries like Pokagon Creek, for example, and some of these other ones. So the mileage adds up. And some of these rivers, they will, steelhead will reproduce in them.
And previous, when that dam was in place, how many miles were open?
There was only 3. So
3. And so we've gone 3 to like
3 to
128.
Yeah.
Is the thought that the real question is, have steelhead been planted above there? But they probably haven't at this point, but they'll probably migrate up there anyways. And maybe you know about steelhead plantings in the future.
Yeah, at this point, we haven't been stocking steelhead in the lower part of it either. Those are either strays from the St. Joe or some from reproduction, you know, in the river itself. We anticipate that there will be natural reproduction in tributaries like Pokagon and Peavine, where we get brown trout reproduction now. So I think we're going to kind of assess and see where we're at with the wild fish production. Right now, we're kind of maxed out on what our steelhead that we can stock anyway. So we'd have to rob them from somewhere else. But I think we're going to see quite a bit of wild fish coming out of that river.
Yeah, that would only make sense. That's a lot of miles that are opened up for the steelhead.
Yeah, but a lot of those miles are formerly dredged and straight. And so I wonder if the meanders group is going to kick in over time and do more stuff like they did in Dodd Park. Yeah,
there's the Pokagon Band is actually planning a meander project on their property. I'm not sure. I don't know if they've gotten the final permit yet. I think they might still be negotiating with all of that, but they are hoping in the relatively near future to restore meanders on their property. So I think they were going to start with just one, see how that goes, and then ultimately maybe some more on their property. So yeah, it's meander restoration is a big undertaking, as we found out in the first one there, but it's really worthwhile. So I anticipate there will be some more of that happening.
Great.
I do have a question about, so I guess for Brian and Mark primarily, how many dams do we have within the watersheds you control that really need to come out?
A lot, I think, is the scientific answer. I mean, I think the last I heard, we had something like 2,500 dams in Michigan just that are registered that we know about, and there's a whole lot that we don't. And a lot of these are near their end of their life expectancy or past their life expectancy. So it's every year we're getting a few dam owners or municipalities coming to us saying, hey, we've got this dam that's got these issues, what can we do about it? So I anticipate it's going to continue to be a big part of our workload for years and years to come. But I don't have a number off the top of my head, just that it's a whole lot.
I would echo that for my waters, particularly the Muskegon River watershed is absolutely riddled with dams, and it'll be well beyond the end of my career that we're still working on them.
Are we seeing increased funding from Lansing to help facilitate some of these removals?
Not a lot. I mean, we've got, trying to remember the numbers off the top of my head. What is it, about 1.3 million, somewhere in there, for between the dam management grant and the aquatic habitat grant? Jay may know those numbers off the top of his head, but it's not a lot when you realize that some of these dam removal projects are upward. A big dam removal project might be $10 million. So it doesn't even cover one of those. And a smaller dam removal, still probably is in the hundreds of thousands in most cases. So, yeah, we haven't seen a lot. Every once in a while, when you have like a lame duck session or something, if they had extra money, they might throw some money at a particular project. But as a general rule, no, we're not seeing tons of it just from Lansing. And I wouldn't expect it now with the situation that we're in at the moment. But there are federal monies for this too. The Pucker Street Dam has that one has several different funding sources for that. So it is a lot easier to get money for dam removal than it is for dam repair.
Yeah, of the money that we have for dam removal, 300,000 comes from Lansing, I guess I'd say state general funds, and over $1 million of that is either through grants through the Game and Fish Fund, so that's fishing license dollars, or is coming from settlement funds from Consumers Energy on the Manistee, Muskegon, and Saubal rivers. So state general fund money is not kicking much in at all. It's either settlement or sports dollars that are doing the work.
Question 2 on the Pucker Street Dam. What was the delta on the river temps?
What was that?
What was the degree of temperature drop in the river when Pucker Street came out?
We don't have a post monitoring yet. It was probably, I'd have to look back, and I don't know if Jade remembers off the top of his head, because that impoundment's been drawn down for a lot of years.
Okay.
It hasn't been a lot recently, maybe a degree or two, because there's that impoundment, although it's still widened the river, it didn't widen it a lot. But before the drawdown, it widened it quite a bit. So I would imagine we were talking, more like 3 or 4 degrees, I would guess then. But Jay may know off the top of his head.
That's right, Brian. When it was impounded, it was at least 4 degrees higher below, but it was pretty consistent, maybe a degree or two last 10 years.
In terms of our organization, when we look at habitat for trout, it's all about the temperatures of the stream if we're trying to have trout survive in these waters. I think that's probably why there's so much focus put on dams right now, because they really can mess up some watersheds.
Yeah, and we took a lot of temperature data on the Dowagiac in 2012 through 2014. We've been trying since the water withdrawal assessment tool and stuff came online. We've been trying to get a lot more data to kind of ground truth some of the assumptions built into there. So the Dowagiac is one of those watersheds. So we had, I want to say 30 temperature loggers or something like that spread throughout the watershed for 3 years. So we've got quite a bit of data. And if I remember right, it was within about a degree of what we had, above and below the dam there, like between Kinsey Road and below the dam. So it was not, I say, since it's been drawn down, since 99 drawdown, it hasn't had a huge effect.
Well, here's another topic in the Dowagiac. Isn't it heavily affected by groundwater removal for agricultural purposes? Because as seed corn production moves north, my understanding is seed corn requires 9 times more water than sweet or field corn in terms of production needs.
Yeah, I haven't. I know that they've had quite a bit
in the southwest part of the state.
I know they've been Cass County in general, which a lot of the Dowagiac flows through Cass County, has had a lot of. They've been doing extra studies on there to try to assess the groundwater, and there's been a lot of arguing back and forth between the contractors for the irrigators and the folks in Eagle that are the groundwater people. So I haven't seen I don't think we have a final product that's agreed upon as far as a new groundwater model there. But yeah, it does have a lot of groundwater demand. We haven't seen the issues on the Dowagiac yet in terms of rivers being sucked dry or close to that. There's some other areas where we've had a lot more concerns on that, because of the sheer volume in the Dowagiac. Seems like it's a little bit more resilient, but there's a lot of water coming out too.
Brian, I have a question.
Hey, yeah, go ahead. Sure.
Yeah, it's a long time since I've been in Michigan, but and I'm not too familiar with your area there. Do you, at least in the headwater streams of these rivers that you're talking about, do you have any significant wild populations of trout? You keep talking about stocking brown trout. What about the wild trout fishery? There
is some wild brown trout in some of those tributaries like Pokagon and Peavine, McKinsey. Some of those have some. They're completely surrounded by private property. We haven't had a lot of issues. Well, some of those we've had more issues with people getting kicked off than others. Some of them, Pokagon seems to have semi-good access, but they're all dependent on basically in either a ruling in navigability or landowner cooperation. So those are kind of tenuous. The Dowagiac, where we've got the good access, only has, from when we've surveyed it, the Dowagiac's a really difficult river to survey, the mainstream, because of its depth, and it's too deep to wade effectively to sample, and a little bit too fast and narrow to negotiate an electrofishing boat. But we don't have a lot of data. What data we do have suggests that the main river does not have a lot of natural reproduction of brown trout. So there's some coming in from the tribs, but the main fishery in the Dowagiac itself is stocked fish primarily. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's
Thank
what
you.
we've seen.
Thank you very much.
You want wild brown trout, you got to come to my water.
Well, let's
All
face
right,
it, guys.
so
Wild
let's
fish are a
talk
lot
about
less
you.
expensive than hatchery fish.
What was that?
Wild fish are a lot less expensive than hatchery fish.
That's right.
And so maybe this is up north. We do have a question about the Jordan River. There's been a number of social media kind of posts lately about things on the Jordan River. One guy in particular asks, hey, what's going on? Are the dams coming out? Are the trout going to be killed for the reintroduction of grayling? And
I can take
that's
this.
all news to me. But please go ahead and set the record straight if you can.
So the dams that have come out have been beaver dams. And so the Friends of the Jordan did get a permit to remove some beaver dams. My understanding is they removed more than what they're permitted for. So we're kind of dealing with that with them. But the second question, absolutely not. We would not kill any stream off in favor for Arctic grayling. We're actually doing a lot of survey effort in the upper Manistee, the Jordan, the Boardman, as well as the Maple, trying to find habitats that Arctic grayling can survive in, as well as figure out what the fish populations are in those sections of rivers so they don't have too much competition or too much predation. So we would not rope gnome a stream to get rid of existing brook trout or brown in favor for Arctic grayling. If they can't survive on their own, we're not going to put them there, or we're going to go somewhere else.
Yeah, so it sounds like, just to recap, there's an effort to go on to put grayling in place, but there's no policy to kill off trout to make room for grayling. In fact, I think that's been part of the research to go, okay, how can these grayling survive in trout streams? Because they're gobbled up.
Yeah, you've probably seen articles from Nicole Watson, the MSU graduate student. So she's studying that for us now, and the promising results are that brook trout and grayling can probably coexist. The brown trout and the grayling are going to have a harder time. So we'll probably focus in more on these upper headwater areas, which are more predominantly brook trout water, and even find some water that perhaps have low or no numbers of brook trout, but still have habitat for grayling.
So we've got a question that's been out there, and I think most of the panelists have seen this, and it's from Erica Doyle. Eric was on the SWM's board for a while and is listening in now. And basically, he's got a series of questions that relate to closed trout season on some river systems. Some are open all year round, some are closed. Basically asking, what would it take to change that? Why aren't they all open all year? Can't we just do this and let people be honest about not keeping trout, out of season, still let people fish the Pine River, for example, even though it's a closed winter system? And maybe this is a policy question. I don't know. I leave it to you guys and Gal to address.
Everybody jump at once. Okay. I'll start and then let everybody else kind of build. Several years ago, we looked at this with the Cold Water Resources Steering Committee. And part of it is, so I think at least initially the rationale was that we would close the streams where we figured there was a lot of smaller streams where there's a lot of natural reproduction. So if it's a big stream, maybe there's enough territory to spread around in, like the PM or something like that, and that could be open. But small streams where there's a lot of natural reproduction, the theory was that those fish would congregate and be very vulnerable to angling. There were also some concerns about people stepping on reds and everything like that. A lot of that is, I think, as far as I could tell from the limited time I had to research that there, I didn't see a lot of studies that necessarily demonstrated that, but it was kind of what we had felt back when these regulations started. And to give you some context for how long they've been around, we've had closed trout seasons for Michigan since 1873. And we've had the current kind of standard season of last Saturday in April through September 30th since around 1969. So it's kind of like opening day of deer season or something like that, where it is a tradition. And I think, a lot of the people I've talked to, if you would open some of these streams up during the season, they would, they would be thinking the sky is falling because all the trout would die. I don't know that we have data that demonstrates that that would happen, but I think there's certainly that perception amongst some of our angling public. So what we keep open is by and large larger streams or streams that are more, in a lot of cases, stocked streams, like at least in our unit anyway. A lot of those streams that are type 4 and open are stocked streams where we're not as concerned about natural reproduction. So I'll let somebody else talk now.
I think you covered it pretty good, Brian. Like in the question, they mentioned the Pierre Marquette. Well, the main stem Pierre Marquette is open year round, up to M37. But then above that, you've got, the middle branch, the Baldwin and the Little South that are closed during those extended season. And basically, years ago, this precedes me, but the decision was made that, we'll let people fish the main stem, but we'll leave those tributaries as, nursery streams. And I can tell you that law enforcement division would not be in favor of opening those up because, that would be a lot more ground to have to cover. And they still have people that are snagging, spearing, and fishing, illegally in those tribs now. So, what we did, Brian mentioned an effort a few years back, and basically what we did was, we all, all of us around the state took a hard look at our waters and said, what can we open up to provide opportunity for anglers, in that off season without really, jeopardizing anything. Okay. So for example, the tributaries of the PM, that was off. The Pine River is another one that, there was no local support to open that one up. But like, for example, the Manistee River, you can fish the Manistee River. Almost the majority of the Manistee River is open year round. So if you want to get, upstream and target brown trout, in January, get away from, places where people are steelhead fishing, you can do that on the Manistee. And there are some other waters too, that we, designated open. So a lot of it's tradition, there's maybe some science into it, some law enforcement. It's kind of a mix of everything. It kind of changes by area too. So maybe not the perfect answer, but that's I guess that's the answer.
Yeah, this is Eric. I'll just chime in a little bit on the background of my question. I'm a small stream fisherman, so I look forward to that season from the last Saturday in April through the end of September of spending time on these small waterways. And part of the reason that I do that is I rarely ever see other anglers back in there. So it just seems to me like the fishing pressure is already really low. And, just tying that into the question of what was the logic behind it. So thank you for those answers.
You're probably right on small streams, like, for example, like that are up above dams or whatever and don't have salmon and steelhead. I mean, you're right. It seems like the small stream trout angler is declining and going the way of the dodo. I've got phenomenal trout streams, small trout streams that, nobody fishes them.
There aren't that many of us now.
I know. It's kind of scary a little bit. Everybody's got to be riding in a jet boat or a drift boat, or they don't go trout fishing. So you do have probably a good point in those streams, but in the other streams that have, salmon and steelhead, that's where the law enforcement component comes in.
Yeah, I think that observation about not seeing a lot of fish or a lot of anglers on there it's really valid, because I think, when these regulations were put in place, we had a lot of, there was a lot of fishermen out, still, in the 1960s when that was happening in the small streams. We didn't have all the access issues. We had a lot more people fishing. It was a different world back when these regulations were first put in place. So yeah, we're facing a little bit different challenges now than we were, 50, 60 years ago.
I have a general question I'd like to ask is, where do you see the direction of trout streams in the state of Michigan heading in the next 10 years? What do you think are going to be some of the critical issues facing us that we need to start looking at now for long term?
Well, Brian, I could give the same exact presentation as Brian gave on my waters with my dam removals that I got going on. And there's, of course, 8-10 dam removals going at any given time. So dam removal is going to continue to be a big issue. And for example, just on some prominent waters that I manage, one dam that's being looked at right now is the Baldwin Dam on the Baldwin River. That's a pretty big one. The White Cloud Dam on the White River, that's another pretty big one. So dam removals are going to continue to be an issue as these dams get older and get more expensive to maintain. That's the key. A lot of these dam removals are based on economics. We like to say that, and talk about the ecological benefits of removing dams, but I can tell you that, for example, the Boardman dams, the reason those dams were removed was because no one wanted to pay to keep them up to, safety code. So dam removal is going to continue, to be a major issue in our trout streams, moving forward.
Yeah, and kind of related to that, road crossings, which some of our road crossings are basically dams. That's one of the things that as road crossings get replaced now, there's a lot different criteria for them to get a permit than there would have been, 50 years ago. Basically, they have to match the bank full width of the stream with their crossings in almost all circumstances now. So we're building that resiliency in that we weren't doing before, and that's gonna, alleviate some impounding, some sedimentation and erosion in these streams. So that's a big factor that's changing constantly. I mean, with every road crossing that's replaced, pretty much. So I think tied to that stormwater management too. There's different standards for that than we used to have too. Still a lot of challenges that need to be addressed, but I think those are two things that are going to, coupled with the dam removals, will help with our water temperatures and water quality in our streams.
One thing I would mention too is that, in the 1900s, the late 1900s, there was a lot of work done, by around the mid to late 1900s by our department. We did a lot of stream habitat improvement on wild trout streams like the PM, like the Upper Manistee. Well, as government has shrunk and we've gotten smaller, we don't do that work anymore. And so it's falling on other folks like Trout Unlimited to take on and maintain and improve the habitat in our wild trout streams. And one example of that is what Kristin was Kristin's presentation, where she talked about the effort on the Upper Manistee. There hasn't been a comprehensive look at the Upper Manistee, this century. It was back in the late 80s, early 90s was the last time that there was a comprehensive look. And so, and I hate to say that, I'd like to say that we have crews of people to go out and do habitat work on, on wild trout streams, but we don't. And so it's groups like Conservation Resource Alliance, Trout Unlimited, Huron Pines, that have been, taking those projects on in cooperation with us. Obviously we try to do the best we can to help, but we're very thankful that we have partners that are willing to do that kind of work on our wild trout streams. Because let me tell you that, those streams would not be as good as they are, especially for brown trout, without stream habitat improvement, without woody debris, without structures that are designed to narrow the rivers, deepen the rivers, and provide overhead cover, which brown trout, so dearly love. So that's another thing that I hope to see continue, into the future.
Yeah, I think you guys, resiliency, I think, is exactly what both of Mark and Brian got exactly right for the direction of our rivers. And I think the other, maybe one aspect of that they didn't touch on is the management of groundwater use, which is also pretty critically important for our cold water streams in Michigan. So, we continue to advocate fiercely on that topic at Michigan TU and making sure that our cold water is protected to keep those streams cold, because, you know, beyond dam removals and properly sized road stream crossings, that we don't really have any other tools to make sure things keep cold as climates change. So that's another big one.
Could I chime in on what you both said? That I think over the years, and I've been watching them for decades in Michigan, Wisconsin, Montana, we found that if you can remove and reduce the human abuses that you've just talked about, or that's one example, then the streams are darn well able to restore themselves, heal themselves very, very well. They've been doing it for millions of years, you know, if we give them the chance. And we don't have to build so much artificial stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's key, is trying to let the stream function. I mean, get out of the way in a lot of cases. It's get ourselves out of the way and let stream function. And another thing I would point out as a challenge, not an ecological challenge, but a human challenge here, is that at least in the southern part of the state in particular, angler access is going to be, I mean, it is an issue now, and it's going to be even worse, I think, in the future. We don't have a good definition of what constitutes a navigable stream. And so I know every time we evaluate our stocking programs, it's like we're hoping that people can get in and fish for these fish that we're putting in, and that people aren't kicking people off. It is, you know, most of our streams have never been declared navigable or non-navigable. So one thing I'd love to see before I retire is our legislature actually give us a good, you know, definition of a navigable stream, or a list of navigable streams, or something like that. That would make it make it a lot easier to manage our streams if we knew where anglers could actually go and where they can't, especially, like I say, especially in the southern part of the state.
You know, Wisconsin and Montana have those legal definitions, and it's very, very handy.
That is certainly a continuing debate in Michigan as to where you can go and not go when you see a conservation officer. So hey, we were trying to do about 90 minutes, and we are at over that point, and we can certainly wrap up now. But there's one really good question, and I hate to try to keep people on the line, but there is a good one. And I hate to drag this on. There's a question about the Boardman River. There's dams have come out of there, which is great. As I understand it, there's still one left. And there's a fish pass system that is under discussion. And can anybody give a status update on that? I think there's some misinformation maybe out there as to what that's supposed to do, and the state of it. And if that's out of anybody's ballpark, that's fine, and we can just wrap it up. But
if you're referring to the question that Shane wrote on here,
yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, well, that remains to be seen what kind of impact that steelhead would have. You know, one thing is, you know, I fished the Boardman last summer and shocked it in a number of places, and there's still a heck of a lot of brook trout, you know, in the Boardman River. So I'm not sure I would agree with that statement that there's been a big drop off. I would agree, though, that there are definitely some rainbow smolts, and we know that the Boardman River would be a phenomenal steelhead stream if steelhead were allowed to go up there, and it would be a phenomenal. It might even rival the upper Manistee or the little Manistee River in terms of steelhead production. So, you know, it comes down to maybe values. I know some people think that, you know, they don't want steelhead in their brook trout stream. And there are certainly places where steelhead do, you know, overwhelm brook trout and, you know, and reduce their numbers. But there are also places where brook trout thrive and even do very well in the, you know, even when they do have to compete with steelhead. And, you know, I have several streams that have really nice brook trout in them, that, and they also have coho, chinook, steelhead, and brown trout. So a lot of times it depends on environmental conditions in that stream. And so I don't really know what would happen with the Boardman. One thing I will say about the Boardman, and this is something that I've also noticed in the upper Manistee, is that yes, there are a lot of brook trout in the Boardman and the upper Manistee, but they're dinky. Man, and I'm working on a report right now for the upper Manistee that should be coming out hopefully within a month or so. And similar to the Boardman, we have shocked thousands and thousands of brook trout. And basically it's very, very difficult in those two rivers for us to find brook trout that are much bigger than 8 inches and live past age 1, maybe a few age 2s, but never any age 3 brook trout that make it into the teens. And so, it comes down to, value judgments, and, a lot of people like steelhead, and a lot of people like brook trout too. So,
so in those particular streams for brook trout, they're in those particular streams, they're not living, the brook trout aren't living past 2 years, but it's not steelhead coming up there eating them. I mean,
no.
Any thoughts on why they're not living past then?
No, that's a very good question. Honestly, we don't know why. I mean, the upper Manistee, you look at like the DeWard area, it's beautiful brook trout habitat. So why do those brook trout, and again, we've got lots and lots of data. Same thing with the Boardman. You look at the Boardman up by the Forks or up by Beitner Road, a lot of those places, it's great brook trout habitat. It's cold, there's a lot of gravel. And man, there's a lot of brook trout there. Numerically, we pull off really big year classes every single year, and they for whatever reason they're gone before they ever hit 10 inches. And honestly, no, I don't know why. And maybe maybe that'll be a study that we can we can look into here in the near future.
I can add a little bit more juicy material, I guess, to the Boardman, the political side of it anyway. So, DNR's been under a lot of pressure. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to pass? And we really wanted to see this Fish Pass project installed and operated, because that it's a game changer throughout the Great Lakes and really the world. You can figure out a way to pass the fish you want while stopping the ones you don't want to go upstream. So we didn't want to jeopardize that. And so we said, we put a moratorium on, we wouldn't pass any fish other than native fish through the fish ladder or Fish Pass for 10 years. And that would allow us to do the studies in Fish Pass, but also see what would the Boardman produce with the dams out. Some of the brook trout anglers are hoping that, habitat will improve and you'll get better growth rates out of brook trout. So that would give us time to see if it truly would happen. So,
can you define the native fish that would pass?
Good question.
So it's anything that was historically here. So, if there's coaster brook trout, it'd be suckers, it would be walleye, it would be lake sturgeon, it would be lake trout, yellow perch, bass.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Yeah. And is that like a manual sorting that would happen?
I think of it as, I don't know if you've ever seen a recycling sorting system that sorts out plastics from metals technology is leaning towards visual observation of fish and objects and being able to sway them one way or another into either a trap or sending them back downstream or somehow getting them upstream. So.
Yeah, my understanding of the Fish Passage project may require a vote of the citizens of Traverse City for installation.
So someone from the city sued the judge, and they were suing on the grounds that part of the footprint of Fish Pass was part of a public park. And the only way you can change the use of a public park is through a public vote. And so the judge ruled in favor of that. I think the Great Lakes Fish Commission is going to appeal to see if that truly is the case, but it may come down to a city vote whether we'll allow the use of that park for Fish Pass project.
Did I misunderstand something? Did somebody say that the steelhead are already up in the board or not?
Yeah, and then I think
Well,
some
they're
of
not
those,
native. They're not native. So what's going on?
yeah, so the fish ladder's closed. So there may be some that were hanging out in the Boardman Lake after the ladder was closed, and they're going up and spawning. We have Johnny Appleseed's anglers that may be catching fish and putting them above the dam. We do know the coho got through. They were swimming up. So the fish ladder was closed. They were swimming up the bypass channel and jumping that the stop logs in the bypass channel. So we put in a chain link fence to keep them from going through. Actually observed small coho getting through the fence. So they're persistent, and they're going to try to get, and they were successful. So I think some of those small coho were, because of that, they made it through, regardless of a chain link fence and a closed ladder.
Interesting times. Okay. I think at this point our panelists have stuck around for a long time, longer than we expected them to. They've answered a ton of questions, prepared a lot of material for us. We're really appreciative of them. If anyone wants to unmute themselves and give a shout out and thank them, that's great. Because I think we're going to kind of wrap things up, and I do appreciate all your time this evening and preparing for this evening. So thank you. Thank you very much.
These folks are important. We do anything in any of our streams without talking to them first. So they are of vital importance to the work we're doing as a chapter too. So we really appreciate your help and all your endeavors and all your assistance to us as well too.
Thank you all.
Can't wait to do this in person again.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Good night.
Yeah, good night.
Right.